The Oresteia by Aeschylus is the crown jewel of the Greek tragedies, and it's criminally misunderstood. There were over 300 Greek tragedies, almost all of which were performed as trilogies. Only 31 of the 300 plays survive today, and the Oresteia is the only full trilogy that we still have. It's no surprise then that it's the most studied of all the Greek plays, but I think almost everybody is misinterpreting it. The lesson of the Oresteia is normally presented as the triumph of democratic institutions over the ancient cycle of violence. The Oresteia replaces vigilantism with laws and trials by jury, so the usual reading goes. And when the tragedy is read in this way, it feels modern. It's a popular idea in the modern West to put the real power of justice in the hands of the citizens. The ancient Athenians do these things, kind of, but definitely not in the Oresteia. If you scratch at the surface of the play, you'll see that the jury and the power of the people and the repulsion of violence is a facade. What's really driving the Oresteia is the same domination of the gods and struggle for power and search for glory that propelled the characters in the Iliad. This is the real beauty of this tragedy. It shows us so clearly the forces that undermine these democratic ideals. And it teaches philosophical lessons on free will, persuasion, and power. The Oresteia. Before we get into the argument, I'm going to summarize the plot of the Oresteia, which takes place across 3 plays: Agamemnon, the Libation Bearers, and the Eumenides. The plays themselves are pretty short, so I'll summarize them in a few minutes. But if you know everything, you should skip to this timestamp here. Agamemnon. The first play, Agamemnon, opens with a watchman seeing a beacon of fire off in the distance. This fire signals that the Greeks have won the war in Troy, and their king, Agamemnon, is returning home. The Greek chorus of this first play is a group of 12 elderly Greek men. These men were too old to fight in the war at Troy, and they have mixed feelings about the return of their king. The old men lost their sons in this war, and they question whether the war was necessary in the first place. The Greek army set sail to retrieve Helen of Troy, who ran away from her husband, who's King Agamemnon's brother. The old Greek men see that their sons died, so another man's wife could be returned. They mourn their sons, and they still regret the way that the Greeks departed for Troy. Before the Greek fleet could set sail for Troy, they needed wind, and their seer divined that the goddess Artemis was angry and demanded a sacrifice. King Agamemnon sacrificed his own daughter so they would have wind to set sail to Troy. Agamemnon's wife, Clytemnestra, has been waiting 10 years to punish her husband for sacrificing their daughter. When Agamemnon finally arrives home, he's with Cassandra, who is the daughter of the king of Troy, and whom Agamemnon took as war booty in the sacking of Troy. Cassandra is a powerful character because she's a prophetess of the god Apollo. Apollo gave her prophetic power, but after she rejected his romantic advances, he cursed her so that she would prophesy the truth, but nobody would believe her. Clytemnestra welcomes Agamemnon and orders sacred tapestries to be spread before him. She urges him to step down from his chariot and walk across the tapestries into the palace. And Agamemnon resists. He says such honors are more fitting for gods than for mortal men. He doesn't want to insult the gods, and he doesn't want to invite the envy of the Greek citizens. Clytemnestra is insistent, and their back and forth becomes a contest of will. Agamemnon eventually gives in for no clear reason other than to stop his wife's badgering. He takes off his shoes and he walks on the tapestries. Cassandra stays outside and she has a prophetic convulsion. She foresees the murders about to happen inside. She predicts Agamemnon's death and her own death, and she reveals these prophecies clearly to the chorus of old Greek men. Despite Apollo's curse, the men do believe her, but they don't do anything. They're too impotent and disorganized to stop the murders. Clytemnestra murders Agamemnon and Cassandra, and she appears before the chorus of old men to defend the killing. She says Agamemnon deserved his death because he sacrificed their daughter Iphigenia. After the murder, the chorus sympathizes with Agamemnon. They condemn Clytemnestra's boasting, they reject her lover Aegisthus' attempt to rule Greece, and they suggest that Agamemnon's son, Orestes, will return to avenge his father, the Libation Bearers. The second play, The Libation Bearers, takes place several years after Agamemnon's murder. Orestes, the son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, secretly returns to Argos with his friend Pylades. The god Apollo has threatened Orestes with terrible suffering if he doesn't avenge his father by killing Clytemnestra and Aegisthus. The play begins at Agamemnon's tomb. Orestes cuts off a lock of his hair and prays to his dead father. He sneaks away just as his sister, Electra, arrives with a group of slave women. These slave women are the chorus of this play. No more old Greek guys. And these slave women carry libations to pour out as offerings on the tomb. Clytemnestra sent the libation bearers after she had a scary dream. She gave birth to a snake, wrapped it like a baby, and it drew blood while nursing from her breast. The dream suggests that the child she bore will return to wound her. Electra doesn't honor her mother's instructions sincerely. With the chorus's encouragement, she pours the offerings while praying not for reconciliation, but for vengeance. She asks for the return of her brother Orestes, and for an avenger to punish Agamemnon's killers. Electra then notices signs at the tomb, the lock of hair, a footprint, and finally she notices Orestes himself. The siblings mourn Agamemnon together, and they call on his spirit to help them avenge his death. Orestes disguises himself as a stranger, and when he gets to the palace, he's greeted by his mother, who doesn't recognize him. Still pretending to be a stranger, he tells his mother that her son Orestes is dead. Her lover Aegisthus comes to hear the report, and Orestes kills him. Clytemnestra then confronts her son and bears the breast that nursed him. This is the payoff of her dream in which the snake bit her breast. Orestes hesitates for a moment, maybe because his mom's breast is out, or maybe because he's realizing that he's actually about to kill his mother. His friend, Pylades, picks this time to deliver his only lines in the whole poem. He reminds Orestes of Apollo's wishes, and Orestes goes through with it. He offs his mother. Orestes displays the bodies, and he argues that their murders were just punishment for Agamemnon's death. But he soon sees the Furies, these ancient winged goddesses with serpentine hair, who punish family bloodshed. Orestes resolved one blood debt by creating another. He runs away to his protector Apollo. The Eumenides. The last play, the Eumenides, begins at Apollo's shrine in Delphi. Orestes flees there after killing Clytemnestra. He's surrounded by the Furies, who Apollo has lulled to sleep. The Furies are the Greek chorus in this play. Apollo protects Orestes and says that the killing was justified because Clytemnestra murdered Agamemnon and because Apollo himself persuaded Orestes to exact revenge. He sends Orestes to Athens, where they'll seek a trial and persuade the judges to set Orestes free. The Furies follow Orestes to Athens, where he clasps Athena's statue and begs her to preside over the case. Athena is the goddess of wisdom and the patron god of Athens, and she arrives in the flesh to hear the dispute. Athena won't judge the case alone. She establishes a trial by a jury of Athenian citizens on the Areopagus, a rocky hill beside the Acropolis, which is the historical site of Athens' first homicide court. Through the trial, the Furies argue that the relationship between a mother and her child is the strongest possible blood bond, and Orestes must pay for his matricide of Clytemnestra. Apollo pleads Orestes' case and argues that Clytemnestra's murder of her husband was a worse crime than Orestes' murder of his mother. The jury vote is tied. Athena casts her tie-breaking vote for Orestes, and he's acquitted. Through this acquittal, Orestes is freed of the wrath of the Furies, and he will inherit his father's lands and wealth. Orestes leaves, pledging his loyalty to Athena, and promising a lasting alliance between his people in the lands of Argos and her people in Athens. The Furies aren't so happy. They threaten to poison the land and punish the Athenians. Athena persuades them to accept an honored place in the city, after she threatens to enforce the legal ruling using her father Zeus's thunderbolt. This is the Greek equivalent of a judge threatening a nuclear strike if one of the parties doesn't accept her ruling. The Furies give in. They accept the verdict, and they give up their vengeance, and they're transformed into the Eumenides, the kindly ones. They'll be worshipped and respected by mankind, and in turn, they'll bless mankind with flourishing. I'm going to give you 4 arguments that challenge the conventional reading of the Oresteia. As I work through the arguments, I'll put quotations here, which give you a textual reference when I assert something from the plays. To state the obvious, these are my opinions from my own study of the plays translated into English. You may reach a different conclusion, and that's the fun of reading these ancient texts. 2,500 years on, we can still debate their meaning. I want to start with the ending, the courtroom drama, because it's the part of the Oresteia that feels the most familiar. This drama gives us our first philosophical question. 1. The hierarchy of duty. A building is on fire. Inside the building is your God, your spouse, and your child. Who do you save first, second, and third? The trial in the Oresteia is often mischaracterized as a murder trial. Just like all legal cases, there's a precise thing being litigated by two opposing parties. We should start by asking what exactly is that thing? They're not contesting whether Orestes killed his mother. He's already openly admitted to it. They're contesting whether that revenge killing was justified, and they'll decide if it was justified by figuring out if it was worse for him to kill his mother than for his mother to kill his father. If the court finds that it was less worse, he's de-escalated the violence and he goes free. If it was more worse, he's escalated the violence and he'll be condemned. This is another common mischaracterization of the Oresteia. The Oresteia is not about the end of vengeance. Vengeance is okay in the Oresteia, so long as it isn't escalatory. So the key argument in the trial in the Eumenides isn't whether Orestes committed murder. It's asking what's worse, killing your spouse or killing your parent. When Athena rules in favor of Orestes, she gives two reasons. The first is the simplest, and it shows us the duty that the Greeks value above all else. Orestes was spurred on by a god, Apollo, and Apollo says he was interpreting Zeus's will. If you've read anything from ancient Greece, you know this is as close to a slam dunk legal defense as you can possibly get. Just like Orestes, you can literally get away with murder if a god told you to do it. So Athena's clear. The gods sit on top of the hierarchy, and Orestes obeyed the god Apollo. But Athena does wade into this debate whether the duty between husband and wife is stronger than between mother and child. Athena testifies to the importance of marriage, and she condemns Clytemnestra for killing her husband, guardian of their house. She's given us the clear order of duties, first to our gods, then to our spouses, then to our parents and children. Atop the Aeschylean hierarchy are our oaths to the gods. Even matricide, an unthinkable crime, is justified by the will of the gods. This hierarchy begs a fundamental question of philosophy, which is picked up in Plato's Euthyphro, 59 years after Aeschylus stages the Oresteia. Plato asks, is something holy because the gods love it, or do the gods love it because it is holy? In other words, does justice come from divine command, or does justice exist independently from the gods? The setup of this Platonic dialogue gives us the question especially sharply. Euthyphro is a religious expert who's stopped by Socrates. Euthyphro's walking into the court to prosecute his own father for murder. Euthyphro believes it's his sacred duty to prosecute this murder, even though his own family wants to disown him for turning against his father. The setup gives an obvious parallel to the Oresteia. Orestes kills his mother because the god Apollo persuaded him. Euthyphro prosecutes his father because he believes piety demands it. In both cases, a man acts against a parent in the name of divine justice. And in both cases, the rational question isn't whether the god commanded him, but whether the command itself was just. In the Platonic dialogue, Socrates won't accept authority for its own sake. He demands a clear definition of justice, and Euthyphro can't give it. The Greek philosophers, Socrates and Plato, would disagree with Athena and Apollo in the Oresteia. A command is not just because it was spoken by a god. The command on its own must be just. Second in the Aeschylean hierarchy is the supremacy of marriage. Why is Clytemnestra's murder of her husband worse than Orestes' murder of his mother? Because Clytemnestra broke an oath. Another misunderstood theme of the Oresteia is persuasion. Characters are constantly persuading one another in the plays, like when Athena persuades the Furies to accept the verdict. or when Apollo persuades Orestes to avenge his father. But none of these examples of persuasion show one character actually changing another character's mind. Persuasion in the Oresteia is really the promise of something good or the threat of something bad. Those promises and those threats are both oaths. They're alliances entered into between characters for their mutual benefit. Marriage is a similar oath, entered of one's own free will for the mutual benefit of two parties. Legally, it's no different than any other oath in the trilogy. Clytemnestra swore an oath to her husband, but Orestes did not swear an oath to his mother. Athena tells us in the Oresteia her vision for Athens, that it will be ruled by neither anarchy nor tyranny. The self-government of Athens rests in the sanctity of a citizen's oaths. To allow Clytemnestra to violate her oath of marriage to her husband is to undermine the entire network of oaths that bind a self-governing people. Or to put it simply, Athena's telling the Athenians that the oaths they swear to one another are even more sacred than the duties they have to their parents and children. 2. The philosophy of power. Each character of the Oresteia recognizes Zeus's supremacy above all other beings. But who holds the power under Zeus? The conventional reading of the Oresteia is that the trilogy puts the power in the hands of the people, through the trial by jury in the Eumenides. But again, this is a misreading. The Oresteia shows the potential power of the citizenry, and the ways in which they squander it through disorganization and disagreement. When Agamemnon arrives home from the war, his wife Clytemnestra unfurls sacred tapestries and encourages him to trample across them when he descends from his chariot. Agamemnon resists for fear of offending the gods and inciting the envy of the citizenry. He tells Clytemnestra that the people have enormous power. If you stage the Oresteia as a play, you see the power of the citizenry through the sheer size of the cast. In any scene, there are a maximum of 3 principal cast members on stage. But there are 12 old Greek men in the chorus. Frail though they are, the 12 men could easily overpower any single individual, but they hesitate. In the first play, the Agamemnon, the seer Cassandra prophesies her own death and the death of Agamemnon. She reveals this prophecy directly in front of the chorus of old men. In spite of Apollo's curse that she would prophesy the truth and nobody would believe her, the elder men confirm they do believe her. This is intentional from Aeschylus. He makes them say aloud the exact words, "We believe you." Aeschylus is showing us that the people do have enormous power. They defy the curse of the god Apollo and recognize the truth prophesied by Cassandra, but they do nothing. They allow her to walk to her death. And even after they hear an offstage scream from Agamemnon, they can't organize themselves to do anything. For the only time in the surviving Greek tragedies, the 12-person chorus splits into 12 separate voices. And each old man offers some different suggestion of what to do as they're hearing Agamemnon being murdered. But they can't agree on what to do, so they do nothing. In the last play, the Eumenides, Athena's vote in favor of Orestes is decisive only because the jury of the 10 wisest men of Athens are split 5-5. Again, the people cannot agree on what to do. Their disagreement robs them of their collective power. Their disunity allows a powerful individual to be the difference maker. The strong man Agamemnon controlled Argos before the Trojan War. Clytemnestra decided Agamemnon's fate when the chorus couldn't take collective action to stop the murder. And the goddess Athena acquitted Orestes when the jury couldn't agree on a verdict. Athena's great hope for her citizens is to resist the pull of anarchy and tyranny. And the chaos of the Athenian citizenry in the Oresteia shows us the magnitude of this challenge. 3. The philosophy of persuasion. The Greek tragedies present characters taking drastic actions in impossible situations. The story of the Oresteia is a series of drastic actions. Agamemnon kills his daughter, Clytemnestra kills her husband, Orestes kills his mother, and Athena apportions a new cosmic domain for the Furies. Each character at each decision point has multiple reasons for acting, and the entanglement of these reasons begs the question, why does anyone do anything? The Greek word pytho means persuasion, and it appears 20 times in the Greek text of the Oresteia, more frequently than the Greek words for law and oath. And the frequency of this word, pytho, tells us it's important. The basic structure of the trial is a prosecutor and a defendant trying to persuade a jury. Yet for how often pytho, or persuasion, is repeated in the Oresteia, the text doesn't give us a single example of one character persuading another through rationality. I'm going to argue that each example of persuasion in the Oresteia is actually an appeal to self-interest, and that this self-interest is the reason why we do everything. And just like we spoke earlier about the importance of oaths binding a self-governing people, it's their self-interest that motivates them to make those oaths. We're getting here at the foundation of why families and communities and nation states form. It's all self-interest. On the surface level, it looks like King Agamemnon is persuaded by a god to sacrifice his daughter Iphigenia. And as we said earlier, that's the home run in Greek literature. You can do anything if a god told you. But I think when we look deeper, we see he's persuaded himself out of his own self-interest to sacrifice his daughter. If Agamemnon believed so blindly in the gods that he would sacrifice his own daughter, there's nothing Clytemnestra could have said to him that would convince him to walk across the sacred tapestries. Clytemnestra's insistence that her husband walk on the tapestries is a test. She wants to know whether her husband sacrificed Iphigenia out of absolute obedience to the gods. The answer is no. He walks across the tapestries and he shows us that he doesn't value the gods above all else. And he proves that there was an ulterior motive for the sacrifice. That's enough for Clytemnestra. She's ready to whack him with the knife. But I still want to know what Agamemnon's motivation is. What motivation is so strong that you could persuade yourself to sacrifice your own daughter? Aeschylus presents this motive as fortune. Through the chorus of Old Men, he tells us that Agamemnon was swept away by the wrenching winds of fortune. And like father, like son, Orestes has similar motives for killing his mother. He says he's compelled by the god Apollo, just as Agamemnon says he's compelled by the goddess Artemis. But at 3 different times in the second play, The Libation Bearers, Orestes tells us that he wants his birthright. He wants to reclaim his father's lands and fortunes, and he can only do that if he kills his mother and her lover. And when Athena acquits him in the trial, his first words are to thank her for saving his fortune. There are multiple motivations at play for each of these decisions in the Oresteia, but I'm a cynic. I think Aeschylus is showing us that self-interest is an even stronger motive than honoring the gods or honoring your family. The most challenging act of persuasion in the trilogy falls to Athena herself, when she rules in favor of Orestes and against the Furies. These powerful ancient gods of vengeance turn on her. They threaten to curse the lands of Athens. Twice, she tries to persuade them to accept her verdict with reason. But they only accept her verdict after she threatens them with Zeus's bolt. Again, this is the Greek equivalent of threatening a nuclear strike. The Furies don't accept her judgment because they subscribe to her belief in the supremacy of marriage, or her deference to the will of Zeus. They reject her rationality. They only accept her judgment because it's the best available option to them. Their choices are to be obliterated by Zeus's bolt, or to accept a new domain as the kindly ones. They too are persuaded by their own self-interest. I won't go through each of the examples in the Oresteia of self-interest masquerading as persuasion, but we see this over and over again. The chorus of old Greek men in the first play went on and on about Agamemnon's unjust war, and how he took more than his fair share of spoils from Troy, and how he brutally sacrificed his daughter and took the lives of their sons. But when Agamemnon is standing there, arrived home from the war, they accept him. Why? Because he's powerful. If you can't beat him, join him. It's in their self-interest to serve him. And when Orestes pleads his case to Athena, he makes promise after promise that his people in the lands of Argos will serve her if she acquits him. Athena doesn't acknowledge these commitments. She won't compromise her impartiality, but they're just another attempt to persuade by appealing to self-interest. We're told that the Oresteia shows the triumph of institutions and laws and justice. But what we really have here is just a tangled mess of self-interest. Greek society doesn't actually stand for anything. Why does anyone do anything in the Oresteia? not because it's the right thing to do, not because it upholds a civic ideal of Greece. They act out of self-interest. The gods seek honor. Great men like Agamemnon and Orestes seek fortune and power. And the citizenry sways with the wind. This is the precariousness of Athenian and any democracy. The self-governance of the people only lasts as long as their self-interest aligns. This is a form of philosophical relativism. Everybody wants what's best for them, but there's no objective ideal to strive toward. It begs another obvious question of philosophy. What is a just city? And again, Plato will try and give us the answer. He does this in the Republic, where he attacks the relativism of Athenian democracy. Plato undertakes this challenge because his mentor Socrates is executed in Athens by a jury of his peers. Plato searches for a political system that's freed of the whims of the gods and the tyranny of kings and the anarchy of the people. Plato constructs his ideal city, his Kallipolis he calls it, to strive towards an ideal and objective good. 4. Free will. Buried under the crushing power of gods and kings and the anarchy of the citizenry is the individual. The Oresteia gives us this hierarchy of duty and this web of oaths. And at each juncture, the individual must honor the gods, their oaths, their king, and the majority. Where in this web of constraints can the individual exercise their free will? This is one of the essential questions of the Oresteia. Which character in the cursed ancestral house of Agamemnon will unshackle themselves from vengeance, fortune, their own self-interest, and the urgings of the gods to break this cycle of violence and reclaim their life? The answer, ironically, comes from a slave, Cassandra. Agamemnon's prisoner of war embodies freedom the most clearly in the Oresteia. Her beauty wins her the affection of Apollo, and he gifts her with prophecy. Yet she acts against her self-interest when she rejects his romantic advances and accepts his curse. When she arrives at Agamemnon's palace in his chariot, Clytemnestra tries a half dozen ways to lure Cassandra down. This scene is a mirror image of when Clytemnestra tries over and over again to lure Agamemnon down to walk across the tapestries. Agamemnon gives in, but Cassandra resists. In her exchange with the chorus of old men, Cassandra is taken by a prophecy. She foresees Agamemnon's death, her own death, and Orestes' return, and she goes willingly toward her fate. So many characters take such drastic actions in the Oresteia, with such nebulous motives. But Cassandra meets her fate with clarity. She says, "I must be brave. It's my turn to die." Cassandra's embrace of her fate evokes the greatness of Achilles in the Iliad. When his mother foresees his doom, Achilles bursts out, "Then let me die at once." In both Achilles and Cassandra, the character most tightly bound by fate feels the freest. Cassandra doesn't go to her death because she's threatened by a god. She doesn't go to enrich herself. And she doesn't go because it's the best alternative. There is no alternative. She just goes. In this play where there's so much politicking between the characters, out of their own self-interest, there's something so pure about Cassandra marching of her own free will to her doom. I hope this has been useful to you and that you enjoy the Oresteia. Thank you.